Thank you. That concludes topical questions. The next item of business is a statement by Marie Todd on response to concerns raised regarding care of children at Skye House. The Minister will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on the Minister up to 10 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, my statement today follows a previous parliamentary question regarding the harrowing BBC disclosure documentary Kids on the Psychiatric Ward. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to expand on the answer I gave last week. As Parliament would expect, I must outline up front that I am unable to comment on the detail of individual cases of care and treatment. However, I do want to say two things very clearly at the outset. Firstly, I was shocked at what I saw in the programme. The accounts given by the young people about practices they experienced were appalling and upsetting to hear. My heart goes out to them and their families. Secondly, I want to put on record my sincere thanks to those young people for having the courage to come forward and to tell their stories. They did so articulately and movingly, but they shouldn't have had to do so. As I said in the Chamber last week, when our most vulnerable and unwell young people ask for help for their mental health, we owe them the highest standard of care and compassion. It is all too clear that what was described is completely and wholly unacceptable. It should not have happened, and we will do all in our power to prevent it happening again. Today, I will outline what must and will improve within our child and adolescent mental health units, both in terms of standard of care and system oversight. All young people who need inpatient admission for their mental health must be able to access safe, high-quality care. That care must always respect their human rights and support their recovery. I want to speak directly to the young people featured in the documentary. My message to them is that their testimonies will result in change for the better. Presiding Officer, staff in our inpatient facilities take critical decisions every day. Their obligation is to take those decisions consistently, informed by clinical evidence and with the patient's rights and best interests central every time. There are, of course, healthcare staff across Scotland who demonstrate extraordinary skill and compassion. Every day they can and do save lives. Their role supports a fundamental principle: recovery is possible. It is possible across the full range of need for milder mental health conditions and for severe and enduring mental illness, including those who are in inpatient facilities. There were moving and inspiring accounts in the disclosure film of how some of the young people are now studying to become nurses, doctors and psychologists. That is what recovery means. We maximise the chance of recovery if care and treatment is timely, compassionate, evidence-based and respects the patient's rights. What I found so disturbing about the documentary was the culture depicted. By any standards, the behaviour of some staff during the time covered fell far below that what we all expect of healthcare professionals, or, in fact, of basic standards of decency and compassion. As we saw, patients in CAMHS facilities are often acutely unwell. They frequently require to be admitted for their own safety. Many will be detained under the Mental Health Act. They will not be there voluntarily. A well-functioning mental health inpatient facility will ensure that our most vulnerable people always receive the treatment and care necessary to keep them safe. And even in that context, some treatment options are a last resort. Issues relating to nasogastric feeding, sedation and restraint require staff to make delicate judgments. Sometimes these treatments can literally be the difference between life and death, and by definition, these are difficult decisions for staff to make. This was acknowledged in the programme. However, what also came across very clearly was a disregard for patients' rights by some staff working in the inpatient unit at the time. There was inappropriate, cruel and stigmatising language used. The young people described that they had often shown nothing other than the symptoms of their illnesses. Treatment decisions are difficult, but that can never be an excuse for the kind of operational culture that was described. I now turn to my expectations for what will change. NHS boards are responsible for the quality of care that they provide. However, since I was made aware of the allegations in the programme, my officials have been in ongoing contact with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. The board has given clear assurance that the issues raised in the programme have been dealt with in accordance with their complaints, procedures and legitimate expectations of care. As soon as they were made aware of the allegations in the programme, the board undertook a rapid information gathering exercise. Their view is that standards have significantly improved since the events described. An internal quality of care review is now also in progress and will be completed by March 14th. It is considering a range of indicators to assess current practice and to drive improvement. Further, an external review is being commissioned to review the care, treatment and patient experience at Skye House. The board is in the process of sourcing appropriate external expertise to undertake this, which I expect is a matter of urgency. I will carefully scrutinise the outcomes of both of these reviews as soon as they have taken place, and I expect Greater Glasgow and Clyde to act immediately on any recommendations for improvement. As they would expect, I will hold the board closely to account for this. The Cabinet Secretary and I will meet with the Chief Executive tomorrow, along with the Chief Executives from NHS Lothian and NHS Tayside, which also host adolescent inpatient units. I'll be seeking further direct assurance that the issues raised in the programme have been addressed and care and treatment has improved. I will also be asking about the governance arrangements in place to make sure that this can never happen again. But as Minister for Mental Wellbeing, I want to go even further to ensure that these units are operating in the way I expect. To that end, I have asked NHS Healthcare Improvement Scotland as the inspection body and the Mental Welfare Commission as the independent organisation responsible for providing assurance on compliance with the Mental Health Act to carry out a series of visits to all 3 adolescent inpatient units in Scotland, plus the National Child Inpatient Unit, as soon as possible. My view is that the independent perspective is required to provide wider assurance on care, quality, patient safety and patient experience. The voices of children and young people and their families will be central to these visits, and I'll take all resultant recommendations for how we can improve the scrutiny of our CAMHS facilities very seriously. Whether they come from the ongoing reviews by the board or from this enhanced programme of visits. Presiding Officer, what we saw in the disclosure film would have been deeply worrying for members across the chamber. My door is open to members who want to discuss it further. I'll continue to engage collaboratively with members from all parties on this matter. Before I close, I'd like to address one issue that has been raised in terms of the role of the Mental Welfare Commission. Some reports have questioned the effectiveness of the Commission's scrutiny and suggested that they did not pick up on issues raised in the programme. The Commission is an independent body and can rightly speak for itself. Commission representatives have visited Skye House 7 times since 2016, using a mix of pre-announced and unannounced inspections. Those reports highlighted both concerns and elements of positive practice. However, it is important to point out that the Commission bases its findings and recommendations on observations from the limited time frame of each visit. What is crucial is that boards act on the recommendations made. There must always be appropriate governance and assurance processes to ensure effective care. And a working culture which responds to feedback so it's delivered with kindness and compassion on an ongoing basis. As I've outlined, I am determined to use the expertise of relevant bodies to ensure that care and treatment in our CAMHS inpatient facilities is of the highest quality and that patients' rights are always respected. And I repeat my offer to members. If there are suggestions for where we can go further still, I will seriously consider them. Presiding Officer, I have no doubt that all members will stand together in condemning instances of appalling treatment for some of our most vulnerable young people. I again commend the young people and their families for coming forward and speaking out. I do not underestimate how difficult this must have been. I am only sorry that it was necessary to do so. I treat the issues raised in the documentary with the utmost seriousness. It must and will result in improvements.
Thank you, Minister. The Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. I'd be grateful if members who wish to put a question were to press their request to speak buttons. And I call on Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and to the Minister for advance sight of her statement. The Minister states that she is unable to comment on the details of individual cases of care and treatment. But in this instance, individual cases are critical to shining light on the lack of action taken by those at Skye House, the NHS and the Scottish Government. Because the Scottish Government, they didn't find out about this through the BBC documentary. They've known for years. I have emails from my constituent that outlines when she contacted ministers for help. On the 23rd of June 2023, my constituent contacted Scottish Government officials on behalf of her daughter, Harmony. On the 12th of August 2024, contacted the First Minister, the Health Secretary Neil Gray and the Minister for Children and Young People, Natalie Dawn Innes. The email subject, and it reads, urgent concerns regarding the care and treatment of our child. On the 25th of November 2024, she contacted the Minister, Natalie Dawn Innes, again after being ignored by the Minister who delivered the statement today. I have no idea how the Minister can stand here today and pretend to be shocked, because she's known about this for years. The Minister says that she finally feels the need to make a statement on the abuse of the young woman endured while detained at Skye House, only 2 years late. Is she now only acting because this issue has been made public? So the question I have for the Minister: why didn't any of the Scottish Government ministers treat my constituent's letter with utmost seriousness? And why did multiple parents ignore a minister who was trying to raise institutional failures at Skye House? And will the Minister, if she's going to take suggestions from members today, will the Minister conduct an investigation into this matter urgently to find out why nobody contacted my constituent to give them the help and support they deserved?
Minister.
I thank the member for that question. Scottish ministers, you'll understand, receive a huge amount of correspondence daily when issues are raised regarding a medical setting such as Skye House. The Scottish Government would normally direct correspondence to their health boards because patient care and delivery are the statutory responsibility of local healthcare providers. And although, as I have made clear, I cannot intervene or comment on individual cases, I do want to acknowledge the concerns raised by the family that Ms Gallagher is talking about, and I am extremely sorry for the distress that this is causing, and I look forward to meeting with them to hear their concerns. Because patient care and delivery is the statutory responsibility of local healthcare providers, it is for relevant NHS health boards to respond to complaints regarding services. And in terms of investigating, I'm happy to look into why the family had no response whatsoever, and I will certainly investigate that and get back to Ms Gallagher about that. Generally, people do receive a response. It may have been that the response was directing them to NHS Greater Glasgow and Crown.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Minister for her statement, and I'm sure the whole Chamber will share the Minister's shock and disgust at the allegations made about the behaviour of staff at the Skye House Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Ward at Stobhill Hospital in my region of Glasgow. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board has previously claimed that the staff lacked experience in inpatient units and the complexities of the young people being cared for in Skye House. The Health Board has also previously indicated that there are staffing issues at Skye House. This is clearly an unacceptable consequence of chronic understaffing and an over-reliance on a casualised agency nursing workforce. It will be difficult to improve the culture of mental health nursing at Skye House and similar facilities until this fundamental cause is addressed. So will the Minister agree with me that there must be an urgent review of permanent staffing levels and training at Skye House and other child and adolescent mental health facilities so that patients and their families can be reassured that these sorts of abuses will never happen again?
Minister.
So first of all, let me agree with the member that the care and treatment of young people described in the programme is completely and wholly unacceptable. As I said in my statement, when our most vulnerable and unwell young people come forward and ask for help with their mental health, we owe them the highest standard of care and compassion. I can assure the member that our officials have been in regular engagement since we heard about the programme with Greater Glasgow and Clyde on these issues and have received assurance that the situation has already improved and that the staff numbers and their experience and training and quality of training is higher than it was in the time period that the programme covers. I will, of course, be seeking further assurance that this is the case, and that is the purpose of both the internal review, the external review, and, of course, the commissioning of the visits by the two organisations, Healthcare Improvement Scotland and the Mental Welfare Commission, to give both me and everyone in this chamber and the public the confidence that changes have occurred.
Rona Mackay, to be followed by Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's crucial that all of us remember that there are many young people still under the care of Skye House. Can the Minister expand on the assurances about the standards of care currently being provided at Skye House, and can she advise how the Scottish Government is supporting the young people and their families who are using these services currently?
Minister. I've said, since I was made aware of the allegations in the programme, my officials have been in regular contact with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, asking a series of questions around how complaints and incidents during the time period were handled, how Mental Welfare Commission recommendations were addressed, and how staff were trained and supervised. There were also important questions about leadership and governance. From NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde's response, I am satisfied that the appropriate review and assurance processes are in place and that improvements have been made since the events described. I'll be monitoring the outcome of the internal and external reviews that have been commissioned very carefully and, as the board would expect, holding them to account. In terms of support, I would always encourage young people and their families to raise concerns with staff or via the advocacy services that are available in inpatient units if they feel able to do so, so that any issues can be resolved as quickly as possible. Young patients and families can also contact the Mental Welfare Commission advice line.
Thank you. Sandesh Gulhani, to be followed by Claire Haughey.
Declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. The Minister spoke of accountability, but not a single manager has been sacked for scandal after scandal in our NHS. And today we heard clear evidence that the Scottish Government knew of the abuse suffered by these children years before the release of the documentary, and yet nothing was done. Minister, who is responsible in the Government for failing our most vulnerable children, and which manager was responsible and held to account?
Minister.
So the member is well aware that the responsibility for delivery of care is down to NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. I absolutely am concerned about what I have heard in the programme. What I heard in the programme, as I have set out very clearly, shocked me and has put in place a sequence of events that will give myself and others in this chamber assurance that the situation has changed since the time period of the programme. I assure the member that I take these issues very, very seriously, and I will be working very closely with the board. Myself and the Cabinet Secretary will meet the Chief Executive of Greater Glasgow and Clyde tomorrow, along with the Chief Executives of NHS Lothian and of NHS Tayside, because there are inpatient adolescent units in all of those areas, and we take very seriously our role in scrutiny of assuring quality of services to our most vulnerable young people.
Thank you. Just remind all members of the requirement to speak through the chair, and I call Claire Haughey to be followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I remind Chamber I hold a bank nurse contract with Greater Glasgow and Clyde NHS. The culture and attitude reported to have been shown by some staff in Skye House towards the rights of service users was hugely concerning. Can the Minister advise how the Scottish Government will champion the rights of vulnerable children and young people using services like Skye House and ensure that all staff are fully trained on the welfare of patients and are cognizant of the rights of all children and young people?
Minister.
As I've set out, I'm dedicated to strengthening the current system of scrutiny and assurance to drive improvement and to protect Scotland's vulnerable children and young people in inpatient settings. The vast majority of our dedicated healthcare professionals are fully committed to the welfare of the patients in their care and go above and beyond to support their best interests. Where that doesn't happen, boards have a duty to address this and to ensure that appropriate support and training is provided. The Mental Welfare Commission has a duty to visit people who are receiving care under the mental health and incapacity legislation. Their visits allow us to hear directly from the person receiving care and treatment whether they feel their rights are being respected. And where issues are identified by the Mental Welfare Commission, NHS boards should prioritise these, reporting feedback and recommendations through their existing escalation and clinical governance structures.
Thank you. Pauline McNeill to be followed by Emma Harper.
Given the Mental Welfare Commission for Scotland has visited Skye House on 6 occasions since 2017, with the main issues raised in the BBC's investigation, including allegations of physical abuse, including nurses quickly resorting to force, such as physical restraint, and dragging patients down corridors, leaving them bruised and traumatised. Can we have any faith that the enhanced programme visits will provide the necessary oversight given the magnitude of these allegations? I ask the Minister, surely it's time to consider regular unannounced visits to facilities such as this, because it's not the only institution which has allegations against about abuse of children. Otherwise, we cannot be sure that children are getting the care and the standard that they need.
Minister.
So I assure the member that unannounced visits by the Mental Welfare Commission do already occur. I think it's the commissioning of visits by the Mental Welfare Commission in combination with HIS is a new development as a result of the programme and the concerns that have been raised, and I am very clear that I would expect that to give us greater assurance both within this chamber and in the general public that standards are as high as we would expect and want them to be right across Scotland. On the issue of restraint, the Scottish Government is absolutely clear that alternatives to physical restraint should always be considered first, and the use of physical restraint should only ever be a last resort for the shortest period of time to ensure safety. Health boards have to ensure that they have policies in place covering all forms of restrictive practice and that staff receive appropriate training. And before any restrictive practice is considered, we would expect that other interventions are considered. Healthcare staff have a professional responsibility to accurately record all elements of a patient's care and treatment, including the use of restraint and the reasons for this. And the expectation is that episodes of restraint would be recorded in clinical case records.
Emma Harper to be followed by Gillian Mackay.
As the Minister is aware, many of the young people in Skye House were diagnosed with an eating disorder, and we know the care and compassionate treatment that is essential as part of optimal recovery. This week marks Eating Disorders Awareness Week, and can the Cabinet Minister please advise how the Scottish Government is working to support improvement of inpatient eating disorder services and wider Scotland services, including those who require this further care and treatment?
Minister.
So, as the member has said, this very week is Eating Disorders Awareness Week, and I'm pleased to be speaking in the Chamber about our current work to improve and support to improve the support and services available later this afternoon, actually in the members' debate. We've recently published new national guidance for eating disorder services to ensure that everyone has access to a high-quality standard of care across all stages of care and treatment. And we've also made good progress responding to the short-term recommendations made by our National Review of Eating Disorders.
Thank you. Gillian Mackay, to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. The testimony from those at Skye House was horrific, and I hope Government are supporting those who went through this and are ensuring they get the mental health support they deserve. Although NHS Lothian and NHS Tayside were not covered by the Disclosure Scotland programme, will the Minister be asking those boards to look into the practices at their inpatient units to ensure that any issues in care standards are properly investigated and resolved to ensure that this is not any more widespread?
Minister.
So let me reiterate again that the care and treatment of young people that was described in the programme is completely and wholly unacceptable, and I absolutely agree with the member on that issue. In terms of meeting with the NHS Lothian and NHS Tayside, which also have adolescent inpatient units, myself and the Cabinet Secretary are planning to do that tomorrow. We absolutely, all 3 adolescent inpatient units will be visited by HIS and the Mental Welfare Commission in combination. We absolutely agree that broader scrutiny and assurance of the system of inpatient care within Scotland is required, and we're determined to deliver that.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, the barbaric conditions and behaviours described at Skye House don't take place in our care homes because of the rigour and the reach of the Care Inspectorate. They don't take place in our prisons because of the rigour and the reach of the Prisons Inspectorate. What the disclosure documentary revealed, I think, was a deficiency in the rigour and the reach of the Mental Welfare Commission. Now, the Commission did visit Skye House on 7 occasions, that is true, but 6 of those were announced. So can I ask the Minister, what more is her government doing to examine the powers and the reach of the Mental Welfare Commissioner to make sure it has the teeth necessary to stop behaviours like this happening again?
Minister.
So I thank the member for that question. The Mental Welfare Commission have power, give us assurance on the application of the Mental Health Act, and their understanding of the situation in the inpatient units is limited by it being a snapshot, a single visit. They do have powers to visit unannounced, as the member says. I agree with, I'm clear that we are asking the Mental Welfare Commission and HIS to make joint inspections of all of our adolescent and inpatient units to provide exactly that scrutiny assurance and that confirmation of quality of care that we would all expect and that we are all seeking at this moment in time. That's why we have instructed, we'll be meeting with them before they plan these visits, and that is why we are keen to have an input into how these visits are supported.
Fulton McGregor, to be followed by Ros McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. No young person should have to endure what the brave young people featured in the Skye House documentary underwent, and I commend them for coming forward. Can the Minister outline how these young people are currently being supported in the aftermath of these incidents, and can she advise how NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde will be fully equipped to ensure that this never occurs again?
Minister.
So, I absolutely agree with my colleague that young people should be able to expect a high standard of care and treatment in our mental health services. I understand that NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde are actively engaging with the families of those highlighted in the programme to discuss their experiences and to provide answers to any additional questions that they might have. As I've set out, I consider it of paramount importance to ensure that these kinds of experiences are not repeated. That's why I've asked HIS and the Mental Welfare Commission to carry out a series of visits and to recommend what is required to ensure the quality and safety of our CAMHS inpatient units both now and into the future.
Ros McCall, to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the statement, the Minister commits to take all resultant recommendations on how we can improve the scrutiny of our CAMHS facilities very seriously. And it's shocking that young people have been treated in this manner, and the delay already mentioned by my colleague Megan Gallagher before anything is done by the Scottish Government. Now, the Minister rightly states that the Mental Welfare Commission is an independent body with limited timeframes for their visits. However, we need to ensure that the communication between the Commission and NHS boards is not only robust, but is able to flag up relevant concerns as a matter of urgency. So can the Minister outline what the current communication process is between the Mental Welfare Commission and the NHS boards, and how the Scottish Government intends to review the process to ensure that nothing follows through the gaps?
Minister.
So the member is absolutely correct to shine a light on the issue of how boards respond to Mental Welfare Commission concerns. The Mental Welfare Commission will write after either an announced or an unannounced inspection. They will make recommendations, and it is the expectation of ministers that those recommendations will be acted upon. They go into the usual clinical governance processes within the Health Board and should be acted on. What we are very keen to assure ourselves of, and this is the reason for myself and the Cabinet Secretary meeting the 3 Chief Executives and commissioning both internal and external reviews and commissioning the visits by HIS and the Mental Welfare Commission, is that we are absolutely determined to scrutinise that that process has occurred, that boards are taking on board the concerns that are being raised and are acting on them.
Jackie Dunbar.
Presiding Officer, I'm sure everyone in this chamber welcomes the news that HIS and the MWC will undertake a range of visits to all 3 adolescent inpatient units in Scotland. Can the Minister please advise if this will be expected to become a regular occurrence, and what role she expects HIS and the MWC to play in holding service providers to account moving forward?
Minister.
So I welcome the commitment from HIS and the Mental Welfare Commission to visit all 3 adolescent inpatient units. And as part of this, I've asked HIS and the Mental Welfare Commission to consider future arrangements for scrutiny and assurance, and I will consider their recommendations and their advice very carefully. The Mental Welfare Commission already undertake regular visits, including unannounced visits, to mental health inpatient settings, which will, of course, continue.